Hi, welcome to this short video on how to have more conscious communication. My name is Aisha Walker and I am a relationship and communication coach. And if you've come to this video today, it's probably because you are in possession of one of my conscious communication cards. These little cards outline what I think are 8 of our worst habits when we are in conversation with someone, and 8 things that you could be focusing on instead to really improve and develop your communication. They're certainly not everything that we do in communication. There are many more bad habits and many more good habits that you could be learning. But I would say these 8 are the 8 key ones. So let's dive right in. On the left-hand side, we have habits that you do that diminish relationship. And we have habits you can learn that will develop relationship and communication. So let us begin at the beginning with defending. This is what most people are actually doing when they claim to be listening, right? A lot of us think the definition of listening is the ability to stay quiet while someone else is talking. Well, yes, that certainly is part of it, but it's not all of it. Any idiot can stay silent, but are you actually listening, actively listening to what the other person is saying? Because if what's actually going on inside your head is an internal dialogue that's already formulating a defense against what they've just shared, you're not actually listening. You really aren't. A true test of listening is actually when you start to develop the skill of reflecting back or summarizing what you've heard. So you could say this is step 2 of listening. Step 1 is the ability to stay silent and not to plan your defense. Step 2 of listening is the ability to listen so deeply and so well that you can actually describe back to your partner what it is they were trying to say better than they even expressed it in the first place. When you do this with someone, it is just the greatest gift that you can give them. It always lands well. People really love to hear that you have been listening to them. However, how do you do this when perhaps what they've been sharing is something that you yourself don't agree with? Perhaps you don't feel it's fair or accurate or anything else. Perhaps what they're saying is really, really angering you. How can you share back to them what they've just said when it's something that you deeply don't agree with, that you have a judgment about? So this brings us to the second thing on the left-hand side of the screen, the ability to step outside of our own judgments, to listen to another person and put a pause on our judgment. It's not an easy thing to do. We are by nature, I would say, judgmental creatures. So it does take practice, but anything can be learned. You can get yourself out the habit of making judgments. So where do you go instead? If you're not judging, what are you doing? Well, it's really a different form of listening. You are observing. You are making a mental note of what they are saying without having a judgment. And you're able to reflect it back without adding anything to what they've actually shared. Or perhaps if you are sharing with your partner about an upset that you have, you could share it from an observational point. So it might not be an accusation or a judgment in which you are saying, you're always late, you're such a selfish person, you're so inconsiderate. You can hear there's a lot of judgment in that. You might just say, I note that you said you'd be back at the house at 7 o'clock tonight, and I see that it's actually 8:30 p.m. That is an observation. There's no judgment there. It is accurate. It is an observation. You are always late, you're selfish, you're inconsiderate. Those are judgments. Okay, let's move on to blaming. Blaming. So you're the problem. I try to listen, but you never listen. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be in this situation. If you didn't have the attitude that you have, we wouldn't have the problems that we have. So do you see, you're always deflecting the current situation onto your partner. But how about if you were to meet them from a place of responsibility, really owning your side of that coin, right? Not focusing on what they are doing, but sharing where you could see that you could improve. That is coming from a place of responsibility. When you step forward to take responsibility for where you could be better, then you are far more likely to inspire that in your partner. But when you open a conversation with blaming, all you're going to do is push your partner into a defensive position. You will actually cause them to be defensive. Where you come from responsible and a place of responsibility, then you may eventually, perhaps not the first time around, but you may eventually draw them too into that habit as they see you stepping up and stepping forward to take responsibility for your side of things without an expectation that they also do the same. How about exaggerating? How many of us exaggerate? You always are late. You never do the washing up. I've told you 100 times. How many of us exaggerate in an effort, of course, to be heard what it is that we want to say? The problem with exaggeration is the only response you're going to get from the person that you're speaking to is those wanting to correct you and say, well, you haven't spoken to me 100 times. I don't always do that. It's not that I never did the washing up. I did the washing up 2 days ago. These are insane and pointless conversations. Don't get yourself into that tangle. When you step out of exaggerating and actually be specific, then that can't happen. So again, it's a little bit of observation and a little bit of specificness here. I notice that you didn't do the washing up yesterday, and I noticed you didn't do the washing up today. Although I do remember that you did the washing up on Monday, right? So that's very specific. Or I've told you twice, please don't put your shoes there, rather than I've told you 100 times. I've told you twice is probably something somebody's not going to argue with. I've told you 100 times. You're actually throwing down the gauntlet for them to get into some kind of conflict with you and start arguing over really what I would consider the small stuff, not the heart of what it is that you actually want to resolve. Get yourself out that habit of exaggerating. Get yourself into the habit of being very, very specific about what you would like or what you would not like, or what your partner has done or has not done. Be very specific. Do not embellish. Okay, so when you are in a conversation, you may be at such a point of frustration that you have resorted to demanding, right? You're throwing your toys out the pram, you've had enough, you're laying down the law, and you are making a demand. Well, how well do demands land with you? How does it feel when somebody lays down the law to you? Does it make you want to step forward and meet their demands? Possibly. I mean, if you do it loudly and angrily and aggressively enough, yes, you might crush that person into obeying your demands. But at some point, there's going to be a rebound, and that rebound is going to be their own anger and resentment at having been pushed and shoved into doing or behaving in a way that you would like. Ask for the same thing, but ask for it, or even better, request it. The massive difference between would you be willing to walk the dog from you need to walk the dog is an entire world in the way that it's going to be received. So get yourself into that habit of making a request. It just gets such a different response out of a person. And on the subject of requesting, how many of us actually know what it is that we want. We often know what we don't want, right? We can often tell people what their problem is or make a judgment or blame them. But how often we let them know what it is that we do want? Getting that clarity before you go into a conversation about what it is that you actually want, rather than just complaining or blaming or judging, is a really key skill. Take a time out before you even begin the conversation and make sure you are super clear about what it is you want, and then frame it as a request, not a demand. It is going to be met with a very warmer response, I can guarantee it. Here's another thing that people do: analyzing. Are you an analyst? Are you a coach, a therapist, a psychotherapist? Yet, how many of us analyze other people as to having a particular problem? You are a narcissist. You are completely selfish. You are self-obsessed. You are ADHD. Your problem is you need to learn, right? These are all analyses. Okay, now let's move on to analyzing. I'm going to bet that most of the people listening here are not psychotherapists, analysts, or counselors. Yet, how many of us analyze our partners as having a particular problem or condition? How many of us start a conversation with, your problem is you're just a narcissist. Your problem is you're totally self-obsessed. Your problem is you are incapable of being tidy. We analyze other people all the time. And once again, all you're going to get when you analyze somebody is their defense or their anger. So what about empathizing rather than analyzing? What would that look like? Well, let's say you are observing a bad habit in your partner or a work colleague. Maybe they are often late, or they're very silent, they may be very withdrawn, something like that. So rather than analyzing that and labeling them as to what they are or what their problem is, what about taking some time to step into their world and ask them, get curious about why they are being the way that they are being, coming from a place of empathy, coming from a place of curiosity. When you come from that place, you'll help somebody actually explore it themselves. And it's not really until they explore it themselves, until they feel safe enough to look inward themselves into a behavior that they're doing, that they will actually own it. And until they own it, no amount of you analyzing them or judging them is actually going to bring them to any consciousness about it. They have to find their way. What helps them find their way is your empathy. And by the way, you can absolutely empathize with somebody around something you don't agree with. Empathy does not mean agreeing. It just means coming from a place of openness and understanding, imagining what it would be like to be them. Doesn't mean you can't then take action or offer help. It just means you don't get to that place of judgment. It's a place of empathy. How about those avoiders in our life? Do you have a partner, a family member who just doesn't communicate? They're always avoiding the issue, or perhaps that's you. It's an awful lot easier just to not bring it up, because every time you try to, it ends up in conflict. It's a good short-term measure to some degree, but at some point, if you don't address the situation, if you don't have some kind of conscious communication, then it is going to impact your level of connection with that other person, especially if that other person is an important part of your life. So don't be afraid to communicate. Really be the change you wish to see there. If you've got a partner who is a bit of an avoider, they maybe struggle to express themselves, words isn't their thing, they're not easily able to share their emotions verbally, you could be the one that steps forward and helps them with that. You could begin the communication, but they're only going to receive that communication. I'm sure you're getting the picture. If you're coming from all those things on the pink side of the screen, if you're listening to them, even if they're not saying much, listen to the little bit they are saying. Making requests, empathizing with them, being authentic with them. When you're doing all of those things, you are going to gently coax an avoider out of their essentially defensive position, because that's really what they're doing. They really don't want to get into conflict, so they avoid it. Communicate, but communicate compassionately. How about placating? Now you might think, how's that on the left side? Isn't that, it's not an aggressive thing to do, placating. Well, as a short-term measure, it may get you what you want, but placating by implication is not what you're really feeling. You are being nice when you're actually not feeling nice to get a response or a result that you want. It is a form of manipulation, and it is deeply inauthentic. It requires courage for sure to be authentic, because being authentic can lead to bumpy conversations. That is the truth. Be brave. Be authentic. Authentic, by the way, doesn't mean being cruel, right? That doesn't mean you tell your partner or your family member what you think of them and what their problem is, and you tell it like it is. That's not what I mean about being authentic. When I say authentic, it is much more about being deeply vulnerable. Being in a place of authenticity means sharing that you feel worried, scared, frightened, concerned, all of those more vulnerable things that you might actually hide under your own anger or irritation. That's what being authentic is. Do not be a placater. Do not say you're okay with something when you are not. Just let somebody know you're not okay with something in a kind, empathic, authentic, specific, listening way. I hope that's helpful. It's certainly just the beginning of all the things that you could be doing to improve your communication. It's a place to start. You could pick just one of these things that you want to do less of or more of, and focus on that one thing for 1 week. That can be a very good way to go, because if you try and do all of them all at once, it can be a little bit of overwhelming. So my suggestion is pick one, pick something that you know you do a lot, and see if you can go 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a whole week without doing it. Have fun. There's a lot more videos on my website. If you're interested to hear more, go to the link below, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the very near future.